Welcome to the second lecture on Peter Berger's Sacred Canopy. Today I will be covering Chapter 3 of Berger's text with the main theme of theodicy. But first, just to provide a quick highlight of the things we skipped in Chapter 2, I'll offer a few important points. First, in Chapter 2, Berger discusses how the nomos, the worldview and its rules, order, and so on, is maintained and propagated. The need for this propagation comes from the fact that our worldview is always under assault by changing opinions and changing settings. As Berger says, society is, quote, constantly threatened by the human facts of self-interest and stupidity. This quote's found on page 29. To combat against the delegitimizing of societal divergence, humans work to affirm and maintain their experience of their own worldview. One of the most effective institutions for affirming and maintaining a worldview is found in religion. Religion is not the exclusive place where this occurs, but one effective one. As Berger writes, quote, to repeat, the historically crucial part of religion in the process of legitimation is explicable in terms of the unique capacity of religion to locate human phenomena within a cosmic frame of reference. All legitimation serves to maintain reality. Reality, that is, as defined in a particular human collectivity. This quotation is found on page 36. Religion, as Berger suggests, kind of places everything we experience on a graph in front of us. It allows us to plot out good or bad, holy or unholy, right and wrong, and to experience some degree of certainty about these things. It also, furthermore, allows us to experience what we call reality. This defines our experience of what is real and what is unreal. For example, in the olden days, there was something called the divine right of kings. This concept suggested that kings were in place because God wanted them to be in place, and thus they were beyond contestation. In this way, the connection between the supernatural and the natural world was made apparent. God was present in the world visibly because of the presence of the king who had been chosen for that position. The idea that a king was king because of God was real for that time period. It was an actual part of their worldview, their nomos, and thus accepted. Over time, however, this view would come to be questioned, and is no longer real, at least not for most persons. The third chapter opens with the same theme. As Berger writes, every nomos is established over and over again against the threat of its destruction by the anomic forces endemic to the human condition. That is, every worldview must constantly assert itself in order to maintain its relevance and its fullness. The reason this is the case is because of the way the world works. Most of our worldviews, our nomoi, the plural of nomos, suggest a certain sort of order to the world. We have expectations of what should and should not happen. When things occur outside of the established order of things, say the death of a young friend or rejection from one's first choice of university, our world can be shattered. You can hear this in our language. When something tragic happens, we are perhaps inclined to say that nothing makes sense, or my world is upside down. This is, as mentioned before, the experience of the anomic. This order, which is a part of our nomos, is called our theodicy. Berger defines it on page 53 as an explanation of the phenomena which cause disruption to the nomos. The word theodicy is actually two Greek words, theo, equaling God, and dike, equaling justice. In traditional Christian theology, it explains how God is just and good when the world is filled with suffering and evil. Again, to provide the rationale for why we are studying Berger, every author we read in this course will have something of a theodicy contained in their work. Understanding the differences in theodicy is a basic way of understanding the way Christian theology has changed over the centuries. By providing an explanation for the disruption within the nomos, the hope is that one will avoid the destruction of that worldview and the experience of anomie. The ultimate example of theodicy is the question of human suffering. How do we explain things that simply seem unjust? If we accept that there is an order to the world and that the just should be rewarded and the evil punished, why does the opposite seem to occur? Berger writes in an important explanation. The illiterate peasant who comments upon the death of a child by referring to the will of God is engaging in theodicy as much as the learned theologian who writes a treatise to demonstrate that the suffering of the innocent does not negate the conception of a God both all good and all powerful. This quotation is found on page 53. Berger also explains that there is a fundamental attitude which belongs to the explanation of theodicy, and this is the surrender of self to the ordering power of society. To put this in a different way, every nomos entails a transcendence of individuality, and thus, ipso facto, implies a theodicy. This is true for any number of approaches, and I will offer 3 examples. For many Christians, one single life simply fits into the massive ordering which is directed by God. For science-oriented atheists, one single life fits into the biological web governed by laws of physics and ordered according to nature. For nihilistic atheists, one single life is considered meaningless in itself and does not fit into order, because there is none, but into the chaos which surrounds all life. Each of these approaches, in one way or another, accounts for the problem of death. The Christian may believe that the problem of death is solved by the promise of eternal life. Death, therefore, is not an issue, as death is not real. The scientists, on the other hand, may provide for the problem of death by accepting the nature of the world. Everything is governed by certain laws, and the human, as something temporary and made only of transmutable matter, reaches a certain end, namely a human death. Thus, death is an inevitable part of life. For the nihilistic person, the problem of death is denied as a problem at all, by denying that death has any meaning. There is no meaning to anything, and because feeling sadness or disappointment can only be done in response to an imputed meaning, the nihilist denies death as a source of sadness. This becomes their nomos, insisting upon the non-meaning of everything as a way of avoiding the pain of everything. For the rest of the chapter, it is helpful to follow Berger's numbers as included in the text. On point number 7, Berger writes that humans need meaning, especially in times of pain. We may want to avoid resorting to theodicy or the provision of meaning, but in times of pain especially, we are quite reliant on it. At number 8, Berger discusses how not all theodicies promise heaven. As seen in the examples provided above, an explanation of the order of the universe does not always end with our salvation, even sometimes for religious theodicies. At number 9, Berger writes how theodicies provide the explanation for why the rich are rich and why the poor are poor, and quite often why it ought to stay that way. Combating these theodicies is one of the major battlegrounds of contemporary politics. Skipping number 10, number 11 talks about the scale of rationality-irrationality for understanding theodicies. Later scholars will skewer Berger for using this scale, and it is intensely problematic. And, for the most part, in this course we will be discussing only thinkers who believe their approach to be fully rational, and who seek to provide a complete and coherent explanation. We can talk about the flaws in some of their arguments, but not their fundamental irrationality. Skipping again, in number 18, Berger makes an argument about mysticism. Mysticism is an incredibly unhelpful category in religious studies, and nothing good really comes out of talking about it in this way. Some of the authors we'll be reading in this course are considered mystics, but this does not help us understand them. Mostly it allows traditional theologians to avoid their insights. Again, in points 28 and 29, Berger now discusses the concepts of millenarianism, apocalypticism, messianism, and, in general, eschatology. Eschatology is another big word, again made from two Greek words, eschaton, equaling last or the last things, and logi, equaling word, study, or reason. It essentially means a study of the last things. This, again, will be an important question for our course. Do the authors we are reading suggest an eschatology, that is, a discussion of the final days of existence? Are they waiting for a Messiah, a final judgment? What kind of judgment is it, and how are they waiting? Finally, on page 78, after point 44, Berger mentions the Lisbon earthquake, which occurred in 1755. This earthquake marks a turning point in the nature of theodicy. Before this time, as we will see from our readings this semester, the explanation that suffering on earth was justified, whether because we learned something from it or because we deserved it, was accepted. After that time, among theologians and philosophers at least, the problem of suffering was renewed and rendered unanswerable in a new way.